Elliot, we hear it thrown out a lot, either when you're watching a match or when you were playing in a match. Intent. I didn't mean to. His hand was. He meant to do that with his hand. He meant to do that with his body. It's a big fight that you hear with what intent means, how intent is applied to the rule. When it comes to reffing, where does intent actually fit in?
Well, luckily for refs, we have a hard enough job, and we're not required to be mind readers. So as referees, we're not required to look at a player's intent. We're required to look at a player's actions. What do they actually do? And I think one of the issues is that intent and deliberate actions are treated synonymously, and they're not supposed to be treated synonymously. They have different meanings. So intent, we're looking at a player and what their intended outcome is. In the context of the laws of the game, when we're looking at a deliberate action, we're looking at the physicality of what a player does. So for a foul, it's the point of contact, the object of contact, the speed, the velocity, the timing, not what the player meant. And for handballs, was there a deliberate touch of the ball by the arm, or was there a move by the player to make their arm put their arm in an unnatural position? So the good news for refs is we're not looking at reading the player's mind, figuring out what they meant. We're looking at the physicality of what a player does.
We'll go to a clip here in a second that kind of really, there's been a play that happened pretty recently in the Premier League that kind of really shows this of intent and kind of where it changes it with the foul going one direction or the other. Andrew, though, from a player's perspective, when you're throwing out the word intent to defend yourself, or when you hear that word intent, how are you guys reading that as far as when you are possibly committing a foul?
Well, as a player, you can read your own mind, which in your own mind is incredibly valid. So when you're attempting to play the ball and you feel that you get it and that your motivation was, in the right place, it's very frustrating when a foul is called on you. In the heat of the moment, it's difficult to sit there and go, well, my intent was good, but I lacked control. So you know what? The ref's probably right. So it's a challenging thing for players to keep in mind, especially in the heat of the moment. But it is important, I think, for players, as much as I want to defend them, it is important to remember that, like, at the end of the day, a referee is officiating for control because their job is to keep the match safe and professional and make sure everyone is following the laws, and they can't really, consider whether your motivation was in the right place or not. So, I would just like to remind players that at the end of the day, it's about control. So if you meant to get the ball, but you clipped the opposing player, or you accidentally ran into a player or whatever it is, that's still a foul.
So the play that is now kind of the recent touch point for this conversation, Newcastle, West Ham, Vladimir Kafal, Anthony Gordon in the Newcastle attacking half in the box. They're both going for the ball. Anthony Gordon kind of stepping in front. He obviously then gets hit by Kafal, or they collide. He goes down. The penalty is called. It goes to review, and it stands. Elliot, how did you read this one?
Firstly, this is a good example of demonstrating that intent was not relevant. It's easy to watch that clip and agree that Kufal's eyes were on the ball. He took a swing of the leg, thinking, I'm just going to poke this ball away. And in the split second before his own foot makes connection with the ball, across comes Gordon, and instead of kicking the ball, he's kicking Gordon. No intent, we can agree. And so we're looking at the physicality of this. The case in favor of giving the penalty is that Anthony Gordon got to the space first. He got to the space between Kufal and the ball. He's not touching or playing the ball, but he's allowed to get to that space, and he's protecting the ball. And having gotten to that space a fraction of a second before Kufal, in comes the contact, and he gets kicked. So that's the case for Gordon being awarded the penalty. I know that there is strong opinion on both sides of the fence, but if I had to advocate for the penalty, that would be the best case I can put forward.
Andrew, you kind of saw this Rorschach test the other way. You have a lot of sympathy for Kufal in this case.
Yeah, absolutely do. For me, this is I disagree. I think this is 100% a foul on Gordon. In fact, I think it's pretty clear. There's a few different ways to look at it, as Elliot has mentioned. For me, Gordon not looking at the ball, not playing the ball, in fact, going by the ball and making contact with Kufal, in my opinion, he lacked the control. And again, 10 is not irrelevant. He lacked the control and put Kufal in danger and himself in danger, which is exactly the laws are written to avoid that. So for me, I think this is very clear. I think he made the contact with Kufal because as much as Kufal was striking towards the ball, Anthony Gordon was making a very similar motion, missed the ball and struck, or he didn't really strike, but maybe kind of went past Kufal, which caused the initial physical touch, and then he actually kind of clipped him at the end as his foot came across. So for me, I think this is pretty obvious. But this is just one example. There's also different examples where a player, Kufal is kind of poking towards the ball. He's not in a full, with his leg back and then moving forward to strike the ball from a standing position. There's a lot of examples of that too. And I personally, this is not how the laws are currently written, but I would strongly advocate that the laws need to be written that once a player is in their ball striking motion, the opposing player cannot enter into that space. And if they do, then they kind of forfeit their right to that space because I just think that's dangerous for everyone involved. And I don't really see how that benefits the game by allowing players to just step in front of the ball striking motion and get kicked and both players are injured and no one gets the ball. By the letter of the law, that's currently the way it's written, that would be a foul on the player making the ball striking motion, but it just doesn't seem fair to anyone, and it's certainly not promoting safety. So, this is definitely a frustrating, in my opinion, it's a very frustrating decision. I can see why it's called. I see Elliot's point. He gets to the space first, but I do think there's further context there. Like, why was he in that space? Is it, was he, did he really have the right to that space? And I don't think he did. So that's how I see it. I really do feel for Kufal.
Can actions dictate intent, Elliot?
Possibly. I mean, yes. The answer is yes. But for a referee, our job is to stick to the actions. If you're a coach, then you can coach a player about what should they do, what should they avoid. You can tell them, help guide them about their intentions and what's a good tactical play. For the referee, it's the actions. We might have an opinion about what a player meant, but it's just an opinion, and it doesn't form part of a referee's decision-making process. It might affect the way we manage a situation, the way we talk to a player afterwards. So if I were to advise our Gotham refs, it's actually quite a good opportunity to show empathy towards a player. If you want to get them on your side and maybe sell the foul, you want to call a foul, but you might say, hey, player, for what it's worth, I know your eyes were on the ball and it was just mistimed, or you just caught him. It's an opportunity to show the player you're not judging their intent. In fact, I agree that the player, you had the right intent. You did go for the ball, but nevertheless, it's a foul. So in a way, you can manage the situation to soften the blow of having to blow the whistle, call a foul against the player. Andrew quite articulately mentioned earlier how frustrating that can be for a player when in your own mind, you saw the ball, you tried to get the ball, you didn't mean to kick the ball, and then hearing that referee's whistle is quite frustrating. To have the ref say, hey, player, don't worry, I got you. Nothing bad there, just a trip. So that can help keep the temperature of a game low.